Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt and inspiring tales that touch the soul. Today, we bring you the journey of Megan, a single mother who takes a leap of faith by accepting a demanding job as a caregiver for a wealthy but distant man named Samuel. What starts as a simple quest to improve her son's future leads to unexpected changes, deep connections, and profound lessons about strength, resilience, and hope. Join us as we dive into this emotional story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story with us. Megan had always been a fighter, but recently, the weight of life had begun to feel unbearable. At 19, she had made the brave decision to become a mother. And now, with her son Jake at the age of 6, she was staring at an overwhelming challenge. His needs were growing, and so were the bills. No matter how hard she tried to balance them, there never seemed to be enough. Unemployed and running out of options, she spent her nights in silence, holding back tears. The reality of being a single mother without prospects was crushing. She'd try to sleep, but her thoughts would race. How could she keep going? It wasn't just the bills that weighed on her mind, but the fear of not being enough for Jake. She wanted to give him everything, a home full of love, opportunities she never had, a future full of promise. She dreamed of enrolling him in the best schools, making sure he never went to bed hungry, and giving him a chance to chase whatever dreams he might have. But in the cold, hard light of reality, those dreams seemed like a distant fantasy. The nights would be long, and the mornings even longer. One evening, as Megan sat at the small kitchen table that doubled as both a place to eat and to plan, she found herself staring at a piece of paper her neighbor had left earlier. It was an ad for a private caregiver position, demanding work but offering an excellent salary. Megan's fingers trembled as she held the paper. The words almost blurred together in front of her eyes. But she read them again, hoping it might be the sign she'd been desperately seeking. Private caregiver for high-end residents. Demanding work, excellent salary, seeking discretion and commitment. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Could this be the opportunity that would change everything? She wasn't sure she could handle more demanding work. But the thought of Jake going to a better school, having a yard to play in, and living a life without constantly choosing between the electricity bill and groceries was too tempting to ignore. What did demanding work mean? Could someone like her, with a simple life and endless struggles, actually stand a chance at something like this? But the promise of a better future for Jake made the risk worth considering. Taking a deep breath, she made up her mind. This could be the turning point she'd been hoping for, or it could be a new challenge that would shake everything to its core. The next morning, Megan found herself standing at the entrance of an imposing mansion on the outskirts of New York City. The gate creaked open, revealing a pristine garden that looked almost too perfect to be real. She couldn't help but feel small and out of place. But her mind was fixed on one thing: Jake. She was doing this for him, no matter how intimidating the surroundings. A housekeeper named Lucy greeted her at the door with a polite, almost rehearsed smile. "I'll take you to Mr. Grant," Lucy said, her tone professional, but her eyes hinted at something more. "I must warn you, though, he's demanding and direct. Just stay honest with him. That's all he asks." Megan nodded, trying to steady her nerves. Her palms were clammy, and the silence of the house only seemed to make everything feel more surreal. As they walked through the grand hallways, Lucy gave Megan more details about her duties. "Mr. Samuel Grant has a very specific routine," Lucy explained as they walked. "Your main responsibility will be assisting him with bathing and dressing. He's particular about everything, quick and efficient. Nothing more. One important thing: he doesn't like pleasantries. Stay professional." Megan swallowed hard. Professional, efficient. She could do that. But the way Lucy said it made it sound like there was more at play here than just a job. She'd only just arrived, and already, it felt like she was being swept into something much larger than herself. As they approached the master bathroom, Megan couldn't help but notice the special equipment designed for Mr. Grant: side rails, a shower bench, and a small table with expensive-looking products that seemed out of place in her world. Before she could fully process what she was seeing, the door opened, And there he was, Samuel Grant. He rolled into the room in a sleek wheelchair, dressed in an impeccable suit. His cold, analytical eyes immediately met hers, and something about his gaze felt almost challenging. He didn't look at her like she was a person, but more like an object to be evaluated. "Are you the candidate?" His voice was blunt, direct. "Yes, sir," Megan replied, trying to sound confident. She felt anything but. Samuel tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "Why do you want this job?" The question caught Megan off guard. Why was she there? She could lie, tell him what he wanted to hear. But something about his presence made her want to be honest. "I'm a single mother," Megan said quietly. "I want to secure a better future for my son. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." There was a long silence, the kind that made Megan's heart race. But finally, Samuel spoke again. "Start tomorrow," he said curtly. "Don't disappoint me." That night, as Megan tucked Jake into bed, a mix of relief and anxiety washed over her. This could change everything, but something about Samuel's cold gaze made her feel like there was far more to this mansion than she had realized. Still, she held on to one thought: she was doing this for Jake. And that thought gave her the strength to keep going, no matter what the future held. The first day at Samuel Grant's mansion was everything Megan had imagined. And so much more. She arrived early in the morning, her stomach in knots, and was greeted by Lucy, who seemed less formal this time but still efficient. Lucy guided her through the sprawling halls, explaining Samuel's strict routine in detail. "Your main responsibility," Lucy said, "is assisting Mr. Grant with his morning routine. He's particular about timing, and he doesn't like to be babied. So be quick but professional. Don't try to engage him in small talk. Just follow his lead." Megan nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She couldn't afford to mess this up. As they entered the master bath, she noticed the special equipment designed to make Samuel's life easier: rails for support, a shower bench, and a selection of high-end toiletries that felt so out of place in her world. Despite the luxury, there was something deeply humbling about it. Samuel's need for assistance reminded her that even the richest man could be vulnerable. Moments later, Samuel appeared, his wheelchair gliding silently into the room. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, but his sharp eyes studied her, as if evaluating her every move. The cold, analytical gaze he gave her sent a chill down her spine. "Let's get started," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I don't have all day." Megan nodded quickly, adjusting the bench so he could transfer from his chair to the shower. As she did so, she couldn't help but notice the scars on his hands as he gripped the rails tightly. He didn't ask for help. He didn't need to. His body spoke volumes, but he remained silent. "I'm not an invalid," Samuel said, breaking the silence. "I'm not treating you like one," Megan replied, her voice steady despite the wave of unease building in her chest. "I just want to make sure you're safe." Samuel scoffed but didn't respond. The silence between them deepened as Megan continued her work, her hands trembling slightly as she washed his shoulders. She tried not to focus too much on the deep, jagged scar running down his back, an injury that seemed to hold an untold story. Despite the awkwardness, Megan completed the task efficiently. As she helped him get dressed afterward, she noticed how closely Samuel watched her. There was something in his eyes, something that suggested he was trying to figure her out. "You seem to be handling this well," he remarked, his tone almost like a challenge. "I've been through tougher things," Megan said, her voice quiet but honest. She didn't elaborate, not wanting to share more than she had to. Samuel didn't push further. Instead, he rolled his wheelchair toward the door, leaving the room with a curt nod. The rest of the day was filled with instruction from Lucy, and moments where Samuel would appear, testing her resolve with his silent scrutiny. Megan couldn't shake the feeling that he was constantly evaluating her, watching to see how far he could push her without breaking her. There was something about Samuel that intrigued her. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't warm either. He seemed cold, detached, yet there were moments when she caught glimpses of something deeper, something broken. His careful movements, The way he clutched the armrests of his wheelchair whenever anyone came too close. The way he avoided eye contact whenever something personal came up, there was a pain there. One he kept hidden beneath his stoic exterior. At lunch, Megan met Victoria for the first time. She entered the dining room with a calculated grace. Dressed in an expensive gown, her presence commanding the room. Victoria's cold gaze swept over Megan before she spoke. "So, you're the new caregiver?" Victoria said with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, I'm Megan," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Victoria didn't respond immediately. She let out a short, humorless laugh before turning to Samuel. "I hope you don't give her too much trouble. She seems fragile." Megan's eyes flicked to Samuel. But he remained silent, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. The tension in the room was palpable. And Megan couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria was playing some sort of game, one she was too new to understand. Still, she reminded herself that this job was for Jake, and she couldn't afford to let anyone intimidate her. Later that evening, Megan received a call from Jake. His cheerful voice was like a balm to her weary soul. "How's work? Is the house big?" he asked excitedly. "It's different, sweetheart, but I'm okay," Megan reassured him. She didn't want him to worry. "I miss you," Jake said, his voice full of innocence. Megan's heart tightened, but she kept her voice light. "I miss you too, love. Just make sure to go to bed early. Okay?" As she hung up, Megan felt a wave of longing wash over her. Being away from Jake was harder than she'd imagined. But this job was a step toward a better life for him. She couldn't give up now. This was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred together, each one filled with the routine of caring for Samuel. Megan did her best to adjust to his needs, all while trying to keep her emotions in check. Samuel was still distant, often quiet, but there were moments, small glimpses, where he seemed to soften. It was as though he was testing her, watching how she would respond to his unspoken challenges. The mansion felt like a fortress, both physically and emotionally. There was always an air of tension that hung heavily in the rooms. An unspoken battle between the people who lived there. Samuel, though more cooperative with Megan, remained closed off, his movements stiff and his words calculated. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't warm either. It was clear that, for all his wealth and status, Samuel was a man who had lost something far more precious than money. He had lost his trust in people. One afternoon, as Megan finished tidying up Samuel's room, she found herself once again faced with a moment of vulnerability from him. He had asked her to help him with his physical therapy session in the garden, a place he hadn't been to in years. When they first started, he was tense, his eyes darting nervously as though the garden's openness made him uneasy. But as the minutes passed, Samuel's shoulders began to relax, and Megan could see a hint of something like peace settle over him. The breeze moved through the trees, and for the first time since she'd started working at the mansion, he seemed almost at ease. However, it was hard for Megan to enjoy the calm. Victoria had made it clear from the beginning that she didn't think Megan belonged in this world. The cold, calculating woman had spent the past few days subtly undermining Megan. Her words sharp, her gaze colder. Megan knew there was something more beneath the surface. Something dangerous. But she tried to push it out of her mind. But she couldn't ignore the threats that began to arrive. Megan found a note one evening, hastily shoved between the pages of a book she was dusting. The words were simple but filled with malice. "Watch your step." The note sent a shiver down her spine. She could sense Victoria's presence in the shadows, watching, waiting for any misstep. But who would send such a note? Who would target her so directly? She showed the note to Lucy, hoping for some insight. Lucy's face tightened as she looked at the small piece of paper. "Be careful, Megan," Lucy said quietly. "Victoria is a dangerous one. She won't let anyone take control from her. I'll look into it, but don't let her intimidate you. You're here for a reason." Megan felt a pang of unease but pushed it down. She had to stay focused. Samuel needed her. Jake needed her. She wouldn't let Victoria or anyone else derail her. The next morning, As Megan made her way through the mansion to start her day, she bumped into Samuel in the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes. For the first time, he looked at her not with cold scrutiny, but with something else. Something that felt like understanding. "You've been handling things well," Samuel said, his voice soft but firm. Megan froze, unsure how to respond. She hadn't expected this acknowledgement from him. Not in the slightest. But she quickly composed herself. "I'm here to do my job," she said simply. "That's all." Samuel's lips twitched into something like a smile. But he didn't say anything more. He simply wheeled himself down the hall, his mind clearly occupied with something else. Still, the brief exchange left Megan with a strange sense of pride. Maybe, just maybe, she was making a difference in this place. The rest of the day was spent in routine, with Samuel continuing his physical therapy sessions and Megan assisting with whatever he needed. But as evening approached, the air felt thicker, more charged. The tension that had been growing in the mansion seemed to come to a head that night. At dinner, Victoria once again made her presence felt. She sat at the head of the table, her icy gaze fixed on Megan as if daring her to step out of line. "I hope you know that you can be replaced at any time," Victoria said with a sweetness that didn't match the venom in her voice. Megan held her ground, refusing to let the woman see any sign of weakness. "I'm here to do my job. Nothing more," she replied, her tone calm but firm. Victoria's smile faded, but she said nothing more. It was as though she was satisfied with planting a seed of doubt in Megan's mind. The tension in the room was palpable, and Megan could feel her heart beating faster. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep this up. That night, after dinner, Megan went to her room to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the mansion. But as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the walls, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would change everything. The threat from Victoria wasn't just about her job. It was about something bigger. Something deeper. And Megan couldn't help but wonder if she was being dragged into a battle she wasn't prepared for. But one thing was certain. She couldn't back down now. Not when Samuel was beginning to open up. Not when she could see the glimmer of hope in his eyes. She was here for a reason. And she wouldn't let anyone, least of all Victoria, take that away from her. She had to stay strong. For Samuel, for Jake, for herself. The days in Samuel Grant's mansion seemed to stretch on endlessly, each one filled with a blend of routine and subtle shifts. Megan's role had become clearer, her daily responsibilities more defined. Yet, despite the growing sense of familiarity, there remained an undercurrent of unease. An invisible tension that neither she nor anyone else could ignore. Samuel, who had initially been cold and distant, was gradually showing signs of something deeper beneath the surface. For the first time since she had started working there, Megan felt like there might be a chance for real change. Not just in Samuel, but in herself as well. Each morning, as Megan prepared Samuel's bath equipment, she couldn't help but notice the small signs of progress. Samuel's movements were less stiff, his eyes less guarded. There were moments when he would look at her, really look at her, and for a brief second, it felt like he saw more than just the caregiver. He saw someone who cared. Someone who wasn't there for the money or the prestige of working for a millionaire. She was there because she believed in him. Because she saw him as a man who could still fight, despite the scars of his past. One morning, as they began his physical therapy session in the garden, Megan sensed that something had shifted. Samuel's shoulders were still tense, his gaze still distant, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. He no longer seemed like a man resigned to his fate. Instead, he seemed determined. The garden, once a place he avoided, had become a space of quiet reflection for him. The breeze ruffled the leaves in the trees, and for a moment, Samuel let the stillness of the moment wash over him. As they continued with the session, Samuel's focus seemed sharper. He gripped the parallel bars with a strength Megan hadn't seen in him before. The quiet determination in his eyes spoke volumes. It was as though, with every movement, he was trying to reclaim something lost. Something that had been buried beneath years of frustration and pain. "You're doing well," Megan said softly, offering a gentle encouragement. Samuel glanced at her, his lips pressing together into a thin line. But there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of gratitude, of recognition. "Thanks," he muttered, the words almost imperceptible. Megan's heart swelled. She hadn't expected this moment. This small victory. It wasn't much, but it felt like a breakthrough. For the first time, Samuel wasn't just enduring his rehabilitation, he was fighting for it. And Megan, in her quiet way, was fighting alongside him. Later that afternoon, after a long day of assisting Samuel with his various tasks, Megan took a moment to reflect on the shift that had occurred between them. There was still much to be done, and Samuel was still far from the man he once had been. But there was a spark now, an ember of hope, that hadn't been there before. She didn't know what had changed, but something had. The following day, as Megan continued her routine, she found herself thinking more and more about the future. She had come to this mansion with one goal, to secure a better life for Jake. But now, she realized, her role here had taken on a different meaning. It was no longer just about the money, or even about surviving in a world that felt so far removed from the one she had known. It was about connection. It was about helping someone rediscover their will to fight, their will to live. And that person wasn't just Samuel. It was her, too. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel's progress continued. His therapy sessions became more intense, his movements more fluid, and the air in the mansion seemed to lighten. The heavy, suffocating tension that had once filled every room now seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quieter kind of hope. Samuel was changing, but so was Megan. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, Samuel turned to Megan, his expression more open than she had ever seen before. The walls he had so carefully built around himself were beginning to crack. "Maybe you were right," he said quietly, his voice lacking the usual arrogance. "Maybe, there's still something worth fighting for." Megan smiled, her heart swelling with pride. It was the first time Samuel had acknowledged his own strength. It was the first time he had acknowledged that he wasn't defined by his accident, or by his pain. He was defined by his choice to keep moving forward. And in that moment, Megan realized that this journey, this unexpected path, was one she was not only helping Samuel navigate but one that was changing her, too. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore. She was a part of his recovery, a witness to his transformation. And perhaps, in the process, she was starting to heal, too. As the weeks went by, the mansion no longer felt like a place of tension and isolation. Samuel's recovery had progressed beyond anyone's expectations, and Megan had become an essential part of that journey. She was no longer just a caregiver, but a confidant, someone who had not only helped Samuel reclaim his physical strength but had also rekindled the spark of hope within him. One sunny afternoon, as Samuel stood for the first time, holding onto the parallel bars with determination in his eyes, Megan couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. She had witnessed the transformation, not just in him, but in herself as well. Her bond with Samuel had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had come to this mansion for Jake, but it was clear that her time here had given her something far more valuable: the strength to believe in herself, to realize that her resilience wasn't just for her son, but for her own growth as well. As Samuel took his first few steps, his face filled with exhaustion but also with something like triumph, he turned to Megan, his voice breaking through the silence. "We did it," he said softly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you." The journey wasn't over. Samuel still had a long road ahead. And so did Megan, but for the first time, they both saw the possibility of a future full of hope. A future where nothing was impossible. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for new life stories. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to sharing more emotional journeys with you.